There's a reason this video is titled Red Alert. I am not allowed to title, by YouTube standards, I'm not allowed to title videos saying something in any way, shape, or form that pertains to the military, warfare, so on and so forth. Even if you put something very, very light about war or conflict even, YouTube is censoring. So Red Alert is in this instance in reference to China. Let me show you why. During the 1950s and 60s, after the defeat of in the Chinese Civil War, it was also referred to as Communist China or Red China, to be differentiated from Nationalist China or Free China. Now, of course, we know that China is still a communist nation, and we are about to see potentially a military clash. Chinese media has told Rex Tillerson, which is Donald Trump's to-be Secretary of State, prepare for a military clash. The U.S. Secretary of State nominee has provoked fury with his hawkish remarks on the South China Sea. China's state media has responded forcefully to suggestions by U.S. Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson that China should be barred from the artificial islands it has built in the South China Sea, warning that any such attempt would force a devastating confrontation and both sides should prepare for a military clash. On Wednesday, Tillerson told members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that Beijing's ongoing island building strategy in the busy waterway, through which $5 trillion of trade passes annually, was illegal and akin to Russia's taking of Crimea. Now, I want to point something out. China is becoming the globalists. Just stick with me. China's Z to promote globalization at Davos, not war and poverty. Interestingly enough, Communist China is going to promote globalization at Davos this week. The big meeting this week of globalists and so on and so forth. Chinese leader meets Davos elite as voters revolt. China's president will preach the advent. This is on Yahoo News. China's president will preach the advent of a new world order in Davos next week before the high priests of globalization, who are facing an uprising from voters against their orthodoxy of open markets and borders. The annual conclave of the World Economic Forum in the Swiss Alps, grouping 3,000 delegates from the world. Delegates. They are delicate. They are snowflakes. Delegates from the world of government, business, science, and the arts has created the caricature of Davos man, a rich, rootless globetrotter who worships with fellow disciples in the Church of Free Trade. But populists are singing from a radically different hymn sheet. Their hostility towards both unfettered trade and immigration has already yielded Britain's vote to leave the European Union and the rise of once fringe parties across Europe, including in France and Germany. The ultimate rebuke to Davos man will come on Friday, the last day of the week-long forum, when Donald Trump is inaugurated as the 45th president of the U.S. Now back to this, of course. Prepare for a military clash. Is this coded from Chinese media saying that the globalists are getting behind China or getting with China? Obviously, we know that they've been with China for a very long time. You're not understanding what I'm saying. Are they officially and formally and publicly going to now team up? Because, of course, China's Z is basically going to be a part of the leaders of the Davos elite. Oh, really? That's interesting. It is all coming out, isn't it? Let's scroll down. We're going to have to send China a clear signal that first, the island building stops, the former ExxonMobil CEO told the hearing. And second, your access to those islands is also not going to be allowed. Beijing claims sovereignty over almost 90% of the South China Sea, competing with neighbors in Vietnam and the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei, who also claim parts of the waterway. In a bid to bolster its presence, China has transformed 7 reefs and islets through reclamation into artificial islands. The mini fortresses now host anti-aircraft guns and other weaponry, according to recent analysis. Now, of course, this is all how Obama's legacy. He's let them build this. This is what I keep trying to tell people. If we understand this correctly, then let's go through this here. If we understand it correctly, then the 4 phases ideology is actually quite true. The entire agenda behind Obama was to weaken the United States. And of course, He's not the only one. But under this weakening, we've seen China, we've seen all these other countries gain so much strength. The current world order has reached the phase of multipolarity, and with that comes severe increase of risk. As predicted by other intelligence agencies in 2008, the world will be entirely multipolar by 2025. And now, of course, this is the breakdown here. But, of course, this is a report that we did. An intelligence report warns major conflict could erupt over the next 5 years. Risk levels have not been seen since the Cold War. A new intelligence report warns of increase in risk of conflict between and within nations over the next 5 years. The report states that risk will increase to levels not seen since the Cold War. According to the report, we are living in a paradox, and the post-World War II order is eroding. The report also states that the increased risk is because of global growth is slowing, and anti-globalization is fueling nationalism. These trends will converge at an unprecedented pace to make governing and cooperation harder and to change the nature of power fundamentally, altering the global landscape. Did you just hear that? Fundamentally altering the global landscape, said Global Trends Paradox of Progress, the sixth in a series of quadrennial studies by the U.S. National Intelligence Council. Now, of course, this is a big report. We've got it on here if you want to see it. Let me scroll down further. This is the whole report here. They release them every 4 years. Of course, they usually do not analyze the U.S., but they did it this year. And let me find that part so I can read it to you. Now, of course, the Global Trends Report is published every 4 years by the National Intelligence Council, and usually the NIC deliberately avoids analyzing U.S. policies or choices. However, the latest study underscored the complex difficulties Trump must address to fulfill his vows to improve relations with Russia, level the economic playing field with China, and return jobs to the U.S. and defeat terrorism. Now, this report is massive. This is the whole report right here, but it's massive. And their analysis is stating that within the next 5 years, the risk levels of conflict are very, very, very high. And again, you have Chinese media basically making threats. I mean, not basically making threats. They are making a threat. Prepare for a military clash. Well, what does that mean? Of course, that's a threat. Now, that said, of course, you have China's Xi heading to Davos to meet with the globalists. Something's in the works with all of this, and of course a fundamental foundational shift just took place. You've got the Brexit, you've got an entire populist movement around the world basically shaking everything. We haven't seen this since World War I and World War II. What that means is basically it's a setup. Pay attention. Pay attention. That's all I got for you. Do not be afraid. God bless and carry on.